The last topic of our Chapter 6 overview is going to be our genital system. These This particular system differs between male and female patients, and for the most part, the goal is to appreciate these differences. There's hormonal functions, there's urinary functions, there's sexual reproduction and childbirth functions, and tube systems. It's also important to know these tissues are sensitive, they're very vascular, so if you experience trauma to these areas for both males and females, they're going to be painful, and it's likely that you might deal with some substantial bleeding. So we're just going to break down the various structures in both males and females. So the most significant organ for the male reproductive system is the testicles. They hang down in a scrotum, which is a sac-like structure that actually helps keep them at a more appropriate temperature. Testicles generate testosterone in males, and they're also the location of sperm cell production. So if you are familiar with some basic biology concepts, a sperm and an egg come together to create a fetus, which then turns into another organism. So for the male half of sexual reproduction, the sperm cell is located or created in the testicle. We have an area called the epididymis, kind of on the outside of the testicle here. This is more of a storage and final maintenance on the sperm cells before it exits through the vas deferens, which is just a tube network that leads into the urethra. So sperm cells are ejaculated out during sexual reproduction. We have prostate gland. In the urinary section, we talked about how that can cause problems, but just to remind you of the function, it helps create the semen in which sperm cells are ejaculated out of the penis during sexual reproduction. Same goes with seminal vesicles. They add, again, additional fluid and some pH balance to the sperm cells so they can function properly when they leave and go off to do their job. Then there's the penis, and that is, again, just the exit pathway of for the semen and urine if you're going to the restroom. The penis is a very spongy and vascular organ. So during male arousal, the erection is generated, and the spongy tissue in the penis retains blood. There's some tiny little muscles kind of located at the base here that kind of clamp off and prevent the normal amount of blood flow to leave during arousal. So again, the big thing is to appreciate and know the structures and be familiar with it. For example, if you have a patient that tells you that they have had a vasectomy, you can think to yourself, the vas deferens here was snipped here and maybe a little bit further up, so the pathway for sperm to leave the testicle is disrupted, and that's what's going on with a vasectomy. You cut down the tube and you tie off the ends. Now, the female system, it's internal in nature. So if we take a quick look back here, everything is external in the males. There is some internal aspects to it, but not as much as the female system. Like testicles, females contain a pair of ovaries on either side. They produce estrogen, and they produce the egg cells that sperm fertilizes. So they're the second half of the sexual reproduction function. Then the egg would travel down these tubes. These are called the fallopian tubes, or your uterine tubes. Sorry. And these are very vascular. And when we talk about some gynecologic emergencies, we're going to talk about ectopic pregnancies, or pregnancies that start to develop in these fallopian tubes, and how those are serious issues, especially if they rupture because of how vascular they are. Then the fallopian tubes connect to the uterus. So the uterus is the location, if we have fertilization of the egg, that it implants and it develops into a fetus to be born. It's a thick muscular organ, and there's the inside lining grows throughout the month. Then when we have ovulation and the egg leaves the fallopian tube hoping to get fertilized, that lining builds up with blood vessels and a place for the fertilized egg to implant itself. Now, if we do not have fertilization, and there's going to be no implantation. So when the egg passes through and it's not going to implant because it's not fertilized, there's a signal for this lining to shed itself. And this is what we call the menstrual period. So over about a 5-day span, this uterine lining is shedding itself, and that's where that menstrual bleeding comes in. Then we have a cervix, which serves as an opening, and it's the dividing line between the vagina and the uterus. During pregnancy, the cervix closes up and creates a contained environment for the developing fetus inside of the uterus. Then we have the vagina, and this is the area that receives the penis during sexual intercourse and receives the semen and sperm cells, and they travel up the uterus and up the fallopian tubes for fertilization. There is some external genitalia. There's labia minora and majora, and there's also the clitoris. These are very sensitive tissues and very vascular. So again, if there's any type of trauma to the few external genitalia that females have, it's going to be painful, and if there's bleeding involved, you're probably going to be dealing with a reasonable amount of bleeding that we're going to have to address. And we'll talk about that more in depth when we get into trauma. But I just want to reiterate that we just want to appreciate the differences between males and females and the more general functions of the genital systems.